So we'll just start with a little bit of a brief history. It's my understanding that a lot of you have actually been out to the distillery to visit, which is wonderful. Understanding that sense of place with High West and seeing those beautiful vistas from our mountaintop distillery is really special. And understanding where all of this is made, adds that extra element of the sense of place that will be with the High West whiskeys that we'll be tasting today. High West was founded in 2006 by Dave and Jane Perkins. Dave had been a biochemist. He was out in the Bay Area, and they went on vacation to Kentucky to do some whiskey tasting. And he just fell in love with the process and the smells of walking through the rick houses and decided that he had to do it himself, but he was going to do it his own way. And that was by bringing that to Park City, Utah. So in 2006, High West became the first distillery in Utah since Prohibition. And since then, a lot of the laws have changed to open up and allow us to produce and sell more whiskey and for other producers to come into the state as well. So it's really exciting to be a part of that movement here in Utah. So why don't we get into our first whiskey for the evening? And that is a cask collection bourbon. It's a single barrel, finished in an Armagnac barrel, barrel 31230. So this truly is a single barrel, and it came out of our Barrel Select program. And the Barrel Select program started as more or less an R&D type program. And so that's where we would put different types of blends or different blends, whether it's blends of rye and bourbon, or blends of bourbon, into different types of barrels to impart different characters. And, this is the program where a Midwinter Night's Dram was born. It's the program where Yippee Ki Yay, if any of you have had that in the past,
Yay!
was born. And so that is kind of the thought process with this single barrel program. What interesting things could we do? With this particular one, we sourced the Armagnac barrel from Armagnac, France. And we blended a new to world blend of bourbon. So the age range on this is 4 to 9-year-old. We have bourbon coming from both MGP. It's the 21% rye in the mash bill. And then we have another Kentucky bourbon that we sourced as well. What I love about this bourbon blend and what's so special about it is that, we'll start this part with a little bit of a story. So back around 2015, 2016, maybe 2014 too, there were heavy rains in the areas where the oak trees were growing, where they would go out and harvest the trees and the oak to make the barrels with. So the trucks were not able to get out and actually harvest the oak. So with that said, our main supplier, MGP, had to leverage cooperages, or a variety of different cooperages, outside of what they normally use for barreling down, which meant that our inventory and everything that we purchased got barreled across multiple different cooperages, just because the two primary cooperages that we use, ISC and Speyside, they couldn't supply enough barrels to store all of our whiskey. So that means that our whiskey was stored across 5 different cooperages. So that's like 5 different brands, 5 different methods of seasoning the wood, 5 different methods of charring the wood with some different char in there. And so what that meant is when the same whiskey went into all these 5 different cooperages, we ended up with 5 completely different flavor profiles. And with that, we were able to leverage that and build really beautiful complexity with the Space Bourbon blend. So that is, one of the exciting ways that we look at blending. It's not even just always across different mash bills or different ages, but what's different about the cooperages? What can we derive here?
What was
So
the Armagnac company that you guys source barrels with, if you can share that?
So that information is unfortunately all
Okay.
uh, covered
Proprietary.
under
Yeah,
NDA.
that's fine.
but it did come from Armagnac in France.
Okay, no problem.
Yeah. But the Armagnac, so this was bottled at 103.8 proof. And so when we barrel down these barrel selects, we typically will proof down our whiskey blend to about 100 proof and let it sit over time. And in Utah, when our barrels are aging, because of the drier climate here, our barrels are more likely to see evaporation of water. So your alcohol level actually goes up over time, as opposed to, in Kentucky and Indiana, where you're more likely to evaporate more of that ethanol in the more humid climates. And so those ABVs and proofs go down over time. So this increased in ABV up to 103.8 over 11 months of finishing time. And the sensory notes that we have here, and what I love about our sensory notes is that we get our whole team together to see what everyone has to say about, what they perceive on the sensory. Because what's amazing is that you and I, all of us, have 1,000 genes that code for how we smell and how we taste and how we perceive any sensory input and texture on your tongue as well. And so we're all smelling and tasting completely differently. And so our team came up with, for this particular single barrel, on the nose, we have white peaches, cherry cordials, and dry roasted almonds. On the palate, roasted apples with cinnamon, honey, ginger chews, and sticky toffee. And on the finish, spiced dark chocolate, marzipan, and cinnamon candy. And I always like to ask the question, if anyone else is getting anything else off of the sensory on the nose or the palate or the finish, I always love to hear what other people are getting too. So if anyone wants to share what they're getting, please do.
So I think the trick is to let people actually share their notes first before you go. Why? Because like the power of suggestion is very real. And now that you said white peaches, I can't smell anything else because I truly do smell white peaches in here. But I'll tell you a story too, because this is our pick. This is our club's selection, this barrel. So we've been looking for a nice Armagnac finish for forever, honestly, for a little while. It happens to be one of my favorite finishes in whiskey, and we just couldn't find one that we liked. I considered a couple, but ultimately passed. And on this, I think we were selecting from 2 or 3 samples. I can't remember. It's been a little while, but this one obviously was a winner. But all 3 were solid. This one had everything in terms of it had a very great nose, which sets up your experience. Had an amazing palate and a long finish. And what I will also say, or really it's a question to you guys. So it does say cask-strength, right? No, it doesn't say it. It's not a cask-strength. So here's my question. Yeah, it's not. At 103 cannot be. So have you considered doing a cask-strength single barrels for clubs like ours? Because like I can tell you this much, majority of the people on the line prefer their whiskey at cask-strength, and then we want to be in charge of how much water do we actually add to our whiskey, right? So I know historically you guys were diluting even more. This is not the first single barrel pick from High West. We've done a bunch of others, and those were like at 90 something, if I'm recollecting that correctly. But have you guys considered doing it, not basically cutting it with water?
Right. So I wouldn't say that it's out of the question. The way that the program sits right now, we kind of standardize it to be barreling at that somewhere between 100 and sometimes up to 107 proof. Kind of depends on what we're working with at the time. We do offer a cask strength product line that was it's a SKU that we just launched, I think just last year. And so that is our current answer to the cask strength request. But for the single barrel program, I think that that's something that we are talking about as we go forward, and ways that we might change that or evolve it over time.
Got it. Seth and I are actually talking about a couple of things we'd like to do together. I'm not sure if any of them will come to light, but if they do, it'll be something really special. So I'm hoping they will. I'll just leave it at that.
Well, and a little something that is different for the cask strength, bourbon for last year, the cask strength whiskey for this year in New York State. We, since a lot of the states did release those as single barrels, no finish. Sitting last year was 118.2, if I remember correctly, for New York State. This year's was 119, and with those being larger barrels with sitting 52 to 54 cases, we decided to do them as LTOs for New York State. But some of the other states in the US did those as single barrels.
Got it. Got it. What's also interesting, Seth, and if you can correct me if I'm wrong, I think you got one of the big changes to your single barrel program was is that in years past, you guys had always obviously had a lot of different finishes, but they were kind of available everywhere. And now you've changed where certain finishes are available in certain markets. Am I off on this, or is there truth to that?
Uh, I mean, from my side, we've had you know when we're going into the new fiscal year, we see the list of finishes that will be available nationally for the single barrel program. This year, I was able to choose some of the finishes that we got in New York State, but uh, definitely, I feel like we have a less finishes available than on the cast series for those single barrels than years past. Tara, I
Okay.
feel like you were probably the better person to answer on that one.
Sure. So, to provide a little bit more background information, up until 2 years ago, we were delivering 400 single barrels every year. And that was coming out of, a blending team of 5 people that were also producing or supporting our, main product line. Myself and my one direct report as the two that manage that, in addition to all of the other blends for the spirits portfolio for High West and Constellation. And so the idea, and it was getting very complicated across as distributing 400 single barrels across the United States for distribution. And so the answer to that was to create the cask collection program. And that actually, the next one that we're going to taste, which is the rum finish, that came out of that cask collection program as a batched offering. And so with that, we took about, I believe it was 200 barrels. And it'll be the same bourbon blend that you just tasted here, but finished in rum barrels. And then it was all batched together as one offering, and then sold in that place. And so we have reduced our single barrels down from 400 to somewhere in that 50 to 75 range. And the idea with that is to kind of change what that program looks like so that we're able to curate experiences for people to come on site and visit our distillery in Wanship and taste through and actually pick their barrel on site, so that different accounts or different clubs could come on site and taste and have that type of experience. And so we're trying to make this a much more specialized program than it once was. Additionally, we ran out of bandwidth for our teams to be able to grow the single barrel program beyond 400 single barrels with what we had to work with.
Got it. I mean, before we move on to the second one, what do you guys think about this one? Because I think this one is near and dear to our heart, to my heart, since we're picked it for the club. What are you guys thinking?
Delicious.
It's delicious. It's fantastic. As Jared
Thank
said.
I was thrilled that you guys picked this, Michael. You know my love and appreciation for Armagnac, and I was really hoping that this one would land with somebody that I had a strong relationship with, and it's delicious.
Thank you. Appreciate it. What I love about this is that I mean, you can definitely taste the Armagnac finish on it, but it's done super tastefully in that, like, it doesn't overpower the whiskey itself. And with Armagnac finishes specifically, that's what tends to happen. Like you kind of like drinking this hybrid of the two, and you're not really sure which one it is that you're drinking. Now with this one, it's certainly a whiskey, it's certainly a High West profile, but it just has that specific twist to it, which we loved, and I was so super glad that we finally found one that we could put our name on it. So thank you. I'm glad you guys are liking it. Now
Yeah,
we can
this
move
is
on to the second one.
Excellent. Well, I'm glad that you guys like it. We love our Armagnac finishes, and I always try and get those barrels into our single barrel program. So, um, but we can't always get that many of them. So there'll be more in the future, but we've got other great things too. All right. So before we get into our rum finish, which is part of that cask collection, I just wanted to touch a little bit on, which a lot of you probably know, is that High West really considers blending to be at the core of the creation of our products, blending and finishing. The majority of our spirits are produced by MGP, some of it by Bardstown Bourbon Company, and some of it we also source on the open market for unique flavor profiles. We do incorporate our High West whiskey into blends as our whiskey matures and comes to the right flavor profile. And as we get later on to in our tasting tonight, we will taste some products that have High West rye in them. We do anticipate being able to incorporate our High West bourbon into some blends in the next 1 to 2 years. So that's really exciting and something that we're looking forward to. And it's just part of that, progression in our maturity as a distillery.
Awesome.
So with this cask collection rum finish, this was bottled at 100 proof. And as I said just a moment ago, this is part of that batched blend. So we had about 200 rum barrels, the same base blend, which is the 4 to 9-year-old blend of straight bourbons. We use the 5 different cooperages to drive complexity. And 2 different mash bills, one from MGP, it's the 21% rye bourbon mash bill, and then another lower rye mash bill from Kentucky. So we love rum finishes at High West. It's one of our favorite, and we wanted to blow it up into this program because we had used it in that single barrel program, and it always delivered beautiful results for us, especially with our bourbon blends. The sensory notes that our team, oh, wait a minute. I want to hear your guys' sensory notes first. If anyone wants to share anything before I tell you what our team got.
the nose definitely has like a brown sugar and molasses kind of a note to it.
Definitely. We've got a caramel molasses in the
I'm getting a little maple too.
Lovely.
Almost like is like a light amberana smell.
Ooh,
Yeah.
love that.
I don't get like a lot of cinnamon on this, which is prevalent to Amberana, but I do get some spice on the nose at least.
And when I took the first sip, you get the spice on the very front of your tongue, but it does coat the mouth.
It does, and it finishes in that rum finish for sure.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah. The spice and like toasted coconut, like on the end.
Yeah.
I love how much character from the rum comes across on the bourbon with this. Just an absolute highlight for me about this release.
Yeah, it's like this really nice sweetness at the back end. You get a little spice at the front, you get some sweetness at the back end that I generally get from the rum finishes.
I feel like on the finish, you also do get some of that classic Barbados rum funk, which I don't remember the last time that I had a rum finish where you can actually like that funk translated onto the whiskey.
That kind of dundery funk.
People are saying, I'm just reading some comments. First of all, people love it, but also caramel, like in terms of notes, caramel, molasses, mahogany. I think of what's the movie? Ron Burgundy. Uh, vanilla and maple. People are looking to finish. So, oh, somebody got cinnamon. Okay, cinnamon red hots.
I
for the
can I
finish.
can see the cinnamon red hots on the finish.
It's
All right.
definitely an easy drinker.
Yeah. For being a what now? It's 100 proof, right?
100 proof. Yeah,
Yeah.
right.
The proof, finished for 10 months in those Barbados rum barrels.
Okay.
So some of the notes that our team called out on the nose, we have toasted coconut, vanilla custard, undertones of deep molasses, hay, a cherry wood humidor. On the palate, we have brown butter coconut caramel, kettle corn, deeply caramelized candied ginger, and rooibos tea. And on the finish, we really loved the texture here. And I'm a sucker. Like, texture is probably one of the things that I almost pay attention to first. It has a very velvety texture on the tongue. Ripe peach, dark brown sugar cubes, and cigar paper.
Mm.
I'm glad you mentioned
the-
the tea. I was trying to pin that one down.
The like kind of mid to back palate tannic structure, like that's where the rooibos really comes through, like the tea plus the tannins.
Great.
Very light, delicate.
Oh, we've got someone who says silky viscosity. I love that on the palate for the texture.
Of course, it takes a lady's perspective to say that. My mind would say something like this too. Yeah. She's a cook too, so I run I get a lot of whiskey samples, so I run it by her, and like she picks up the notes. To my earlier point about power of suggestion, I'm like, oh, now once she says it, I can't unsmell it. So
The power of suggestion is real. And when we're doing sensory in our sensory lab, we always keep all of our notes, quiet until it's time for us to share at the end. So we, transcribe, get everything down first, and then we all come together and talk about it. So that's how we try to reduce the bias in our sensory evaluations.
That was something I've actually been curious about on the High West side, because from the other companies that I've worked with over the years, and just friends in the industry, I always love hearing the blending team's process, and then the sensory side, the tasting notes, how each place does it differently.
Yeah, and when we're doing tasting notes for something like this or that single barrel, we always serve it at whatever proof it's bottled at, and then we have some water available if we want to proof it down. And sometimes it makes sense for us to include tasting notes with water added when it changes it a lot, or if we maybe prefer it with a little bit of water in it. For these, we didn't. We kept these at the respective bottling proofs for the last two that we've just tasted through. But we try and have anywhere from 4 to 8 people coming through sensory to give their feedback on what they think, and we all sit there in silence until the last person is done. The silence used to make me uncomfortable, but I'm very used to it now. 9 years of sitting in half an hour of silence thinking about sensory notes. That's it helps your brain work better. Any other questions on our rum finish before we move on to a second rum finish that will be a little different? And it will be fun to taste these side by side if you do have some left.
no questions, but I think it would actually make sense to explain to people why Nelson Brothers is in this kit.
So I can speak from a high level, and Seth, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit more about why, if any other reason that you wanted this included here. But Nelson's Greenbrier is another craft distillery that is owned by Constellation Brands, and they are primarily producing Tennessee whiskey and some bourbon blends. They're Nelson's Brothers Classic and Reserve. And my team out in Utah, we help lead blend maintenance for all of their blends as well, and work with them very closely on monitoring the quality of their spirits. And so, I'm guessing that having two rum finishes here, it's fun to taste them side by side, to taste the difference in the base spirit. With this is actually a Barbados barrel from the exact same place, just different finishing time and different base blend. Seth, anything you want to add to that?
So that was really my thought process here, where with the Nelson Brothers side, we've got a high rye bourbon in there, so the contrasting base bourbons, and then just seeing the approach from, within the same company, the different approach to the finishes. The Nelson's team do cask finishes absolutely amazing. The depth and nuance that they're able to capture from that, and then the timing on that. This releasing at the distillery right as we were, kind of organizing and getting all of this together, and it's just like, we can't really ask for a better opportunity to see, barrels coming from the same place, how that expresses on there, and do it just a nice contrast and compare.
So there's a question in the chat about the finish time on a Nelson's expression.
That is 27 months.
Okay, so much longer than on a High West.
Yes.
Almost twice. Well, more than twice, right?
Yeah. And we at High West, with most of our blends, we're typically targeting somewhere around 1 year. And for us, we feel that is the sweet spot with our blends that we're putting down. And I think that with the Nelson's blend, the blend that went into this rum finish is the Nelson Brothers Reserve. So it's a 5 to 15 year age range, straight bourbon. We have MGP, Bardstown Bourbon Company, and a Tennessee bourbon represented here, with mash bills ranging from that 21% rye and the 36% rye across MGP and BBC. And the Tennessee bourbon is just 8% rye, so pretty low rye there.
So I'll plead my ignorance. Nelson Brothers, they're distilled, that's their distillate, right? It's not sourced. Or is it sourced?
So everything in this blend is sourced.
Okay.
They do produce their own distillate, and they do have, they just produce their own bottled and bond. I'm not clear on what the release timing of that is. I think it did release, or it's about to release.
Just released last month, I think.
Perfect. And they do have some of their own make in their Tennessee whiskey product as well. Right now, the Nelson's Brothers and Nelson's Classic do not contain any Nelson's own make, but they may in the future.
There's an interesting discussion going on in the chat. I'm just moderating, so you guys don't need to. But basically, people are saying the nose on this is much more pronounced, much more intense, which I agree with. It tastes way different from a High West. Not necessarily better or worse, it's just very different. It's perhaps a little thinner, not as viscous, I guess, as High West, but still very pleasant, and has more of a burnt sugar molasses note to it than the High West one.
Definitely more spice from the rye too.
That high rye, yeah. This is also bottled just a little bit higher at 101.4 proof. So you might be experiencing just a little bit more heat on that as well.
Yeah, it had a longer but yet sweeter finish.
Yeah, I prefer this one over the other one.
Ryan says that's my favorite tasting note from today so far. This tastes like vacation. I agree.
I like that. And that's the great thing about sensory, is that it can give you that sense of place as well, or evoke a memory. It doesn't necessarily have to be, green apple. It can be, one that I've used is, walking through a forest, or, my grandmother's kitchen where she used to dry flowers hanging from the rafters in it. things like that.
That's another good one. Burnt sugar cane. And that's Jared and Gary said burnt sugar and pineapple. Yep. I see that.
So sensory notes from the team. On the nose, we have Demerara sugar, saltwater taffy, and tropical fruit. On the palate, vanilla, red grapefruit, sugar cane. And on the finish, spiced walnuts, dried apricot, and tart cherry.
So that's the second one we knocked that out of the park. I feel like our nose are almost exactly like yours.
You're very experienced. Would you like to come join our sensory team?
I'm sure most of us would love to.
Field trip.
Yeah, exactly. We get to drink how much?
We always spit, I promise.
Twist my arm.
Spitting is for quitters.
And that's something people ask me a lot is, how do you taste, alcohol, especially when you're tasting high proof alcohol, so much. Does your palate get burnt out, or is there any way to get around that? And I have not found a way to get around it yet, especially when I have to taste high proof spirits, 100 or higher, for whatever projects I'm working on. But there are days where we have so much sensory that our director of distilling, Isaac Winter, and I will look at each other and say, we're done. Like, we need to push this sensory to tomorrow because our palates are we've had enough today. We're overwhelmed. And those receptors on your tongue, as you take in even food or, alcohol or like the ethanol can kind of burn them, they start to desensitize over time. And so there's a natural process on your tongue that will actually clear those cells and regrow new ones so that you can start tasting again. Because after they bind up with whatever it is you're eating, fats or even fatty acids that come out of the whiskey too, they can't shed off, and so your body has to actually remove those cells and produce new ones for you to start tasting again. And so I think that's another reason that we see a lot of, and I notice it in myself too, the way that I perceive things, throughout a week might change a little bit, or it might change depending on what I ate for dinner last night. So there's some elements that are very hard to control as we go into sensory, but at the same time, the rest of the world is dealing with that as well. We never eat or drink anything besides water for an hour before sensory. So we make sure our palates are as clean and clear as possible before we get into tasting.
Tara, a question for you. If the team was to do a tasting for sensory, like in the Salt Lake Valley versus at Park City, would the elevation, how or would the elevation affect that?
That's a great question. I haven't noticed any differences between Salt Lake and Park City area. But when I worked in the wine industry, I did notice differences between sea level and then going up to the mountains. I lived and visited Mammoth Lakes a lot in the Eastern Sierra, and that's over 7,000 feet. And so I did notice differences there. That was much more pronounced of an elevation change. So I think there is something to that. I just don't think we see it quite as much where we are here. It's just a couple thousand feet of difference between Salt Lake and Park City.
Anytime our team has gone out there, I've just gently reminded all of them, never underestimate the elevation out there, because growing up out in Salt Lake, I've done it one too many times and don't want to do it again.
Yeah, hydrate.
Yep.
Excellent. Any other thoughts or questions on that Nelson's rum cask before we move into a very exciting offering from High West?
No, I'll just say that I appreciate, and I think this was a Seth's suggestion to include this one in this tasting kit, and I'm glad he did, because it definitely gives you a different vantage point on comparing basically the same expressions, but from two different craft producers.
Yeah. All right. The next whiskey in our lineup is our Bottled and Bond. What you have is our second release. And So we just actually first launched this, I guess earlier this year or maybe late last year, for the very first release. And as I'm sure all of you know, the bottled and bond criteria is very strict. And, all of the spirit in your glass needs to be composed of the same type of whiskey from the same distiller, from the same distilling season, from the same distillery, minimum 4-year-old, 100 proof, and unaltered with any additives or anything like that. But what's so special about that bottled and bond is that when you look at it and when you taste it, it is essentially the same thing as saying that this is a moment frozen in time. This particular release is from the spring season, so H1, January to June of 2018. This is a 6-year-old High West rye that comes off of our pot still in one ship at that distillery on top of the hills. Bottled at 100 proof. And, when we went through the process of deciding which season and which lots to use, it was really fun. You can really taste the difference when you look at the spirit that comes off of your still in your distillery within a season. And you see even, changes throughout different production changes or different process changes throughout time, to understand where we were at this point in time. Even though everything is from that first half of the year, we still blended this and hand selected the particular lots to make it into this bottling. And also, we didn't, just because we chose the lots, we didn't use the entire lot. We said, okay, we're only going to use 5 barrels of this lot and 20 barrels of this lot, depending on sensory. And the way that we think about it when we put this together is we line up all the lots across a couple sensories, depending on how many there are. And we characterize them as a base. This is something we would like to be a larger portion of the blend, or an accent, some kind of a blender. This is a high spice component. This one has a lot of this clove character coming through, or a lot of mint on this one. And these are things that we use as accents to build complexity. So that's our strategy as we look at what our lots in the inventory and how we put the blend together. I saw some notes coming through: cherry and candied orange, bready nose with rising dough. Smells like rye grass. Incredible nose, unique floral notes for me. Excellent.
Katz's Deli note there, it's like spot on for me.
What is Katz's Deli?
Iconic deli here in New York.
Okay.
Get you out here on a market visit and we'll go by.
Okay, sounds good. I can't wait to smell. I got to smell that now.
It's from the When Harry Met Sally scene. That's Katz's Deli.
Okay, I love that.
The sandwich is so good. Yeah.
I get hay and ryegrass on it. It's pretty good. The mint's not overpowering, but it's good. I still can't help but wonder what this would be at 120 proof.
I'll have what she's having. No.
So our sensory team came up with, for the nose, Luxardo cherry, basket of fresh picked limes, churros, chocolate chip cookie dough, apple pie in the windowsill and leather. On the palate, chocolate orange sticks with juicy ripe watermelon, lemon peel, baked goods in the forest, because that's what a normal thing to do, is just take baked goods into the forest. Creamy toffee and an oak rocking chair. And on the finish, orange flesh and cool mint.
So what do you guys smoke before you do this?
Every new release, I always go in on the back end and look forward to reading the notes, because sometimes there are those very specific notes. I know for Midwinters, I think it was maybe last with the one that we've got from Act 11 of I think it was a baked good on a cedar plank, and it's like that is a hyper specific tasting note there.
We like to keep it interesting.
Well, a lot of times when you see these things written out, you're like, who drank, who has tasted that? When they say, it tastes like a cedar plank. I'm like, when did you lick a cedar plank to understand what it tasted like?
We do all kinds of weird stuff.
It's kind of fun. My wife accuses me of having a heightened palate, but I want to train it so that a super taster. She says I'm a super taster, but I want to train it so that I can pick up those notes. Because I mean, most of the time I drink it and I'm like, oh, this is really good, but it tastes like bourbon. I'm not getting the cedar plank in the forest, that kind of thing,
Well, and that's what's so interesting. And it does take a long time for your brain to make those connections. And that's part of what sensory training is, having exposure to a specific sensory stimulus over time, so that, at this point, all of us here, we don't even have to think about what strawberry is. Our brain knows that connection right away. But sometimes some more nuanced or maybe more obscure type sensory notes, it takes a little bit longer, or it's harder for our brain to place a word or a descriptor with that stimulus. And so that actually does take a long time to develop. And I mean, I would say that I'm still learning too. It's a lifelong learning process because there is an infinite number of ways that you perceive sensory. And that changes over your lifespan as well. And so, it's one of those things that just, you're always learning and you're always growing and things are always changing, which makes it harder. But that also makes it fun too.
Yeah.
When I go back and nose the empty glass, I get mint chocolate chip.
Ooh.
Yeah, I could see that. I could see that.
Yeah.
One of the things I do when I'm doing in-person tastings is, because breaking those apart down to singular experiences, flavors, scents is a skill and not easy, is starting with sweet or savory, and then letting people kind of be like, oh, sweet, okay, well, if it's sweet, what do you get with sweet? And then kind of breaking that down piece by piece and showing, and then also just there is no wrong answer here. We all get something different. We all have different sensory memories, and so there aren't any wrong questions. And that always gets people talking a little bit more of, not wanting to throw something out of left field and just be like, no, that's wrong.
Exactly. I went, we were on the Bourbon Trail one time, and I can't remember what distillery it was, but they literally had the whiskey, and then beside it, they gave us like a trough, shall we say, of different things to smell. And, like kind of like what she's been saying, we get this, and this, we would take a drink, and then they would say, okay, now smell, this thing that's in the kit, and now taste it again. And, you would get the sandalwood, because they had a piece, they had some sandalwood that you would smell. And then when you would smell the whiskey again, you picked up that smell. And then, like when you tasted it, you could taste, what you had just smelled. And we were making those connections, in the minute that we were doing the tasting. It was really interesting.
I went to an event with the Macallan probably about a year and a half ago now, and their tasting room with the more, higher end limited expressions, they had 3 or 4 tasting pours that we were tasting in there, and had these really probably meant for candles, but they had misted those with essential oils of the dominant part of the nose. And so they'd pass that around, you'd take a sip, smell that, and the way that amplified some of those core notes on the nose was just, it was a learning experience. And it's where I love going to, seeing different ways brands approach that, and there's something you can take away from it.
Excellent.
There's a product out there that is called Bourbon Nosing Kit. Just Google it. I actually had one sent to me. It's interesting. For a novice, it probably is a good way to get into kind of training your palate, especially nose. But what it is essentially like a little plastic box that opens up, and there are different samples of like different spices, and then like vanilla and sugar and all of that. And so you open each one up and you kind of smell it, and then you smell your whiskey, and it's supposed to make a connection.
There's a ton of different ones on Etsy.
Yeah, yeah. This one was on Etsy as well, I think. Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah, there are a lot of options out there, and that's a fun way to bring sensory home and try it next to the whiskey that you're tasting and nosing.
This is what I'm talking about. So you have little different samples of everything in there, and it's it covers your basics. It covers your basic spices. It covers your basic sweets. So it's a good way to get into it.
Michael, someone that went on the one barrel pick that I went on to Sagamore and Oman, they brought a kit with them. They had the one thing that they smelled in each one of the things, but then like they would taste, and then he would pull out whatever he thought he got out of it and then smell that out of his kit. And it was really interesting to see and see how he was putting together the smells and the tastes that we were picking up in the barrels.
Yeah, I recall that vividly. Like I said, if you're just starting out in this is a great way to get into it and to train your palate, to train your nose. I think the downside of this is like you kind of limit it to what the kid has, right? And so you kind of artificially limiting your sensory experience to just what's in the kit. So, but anyway, because you're trying to match up what's in the kit versus what you're smelling. And sometimes you don't make that connection.
So the kit won't have a cedar plank in it?
Definitely not.
A cedar plank in the forest.
Any other thoughts or comments or questions on our bottled and bond? Excellent. We are going to move on to our Midwinter Nights Dram. We have Act 11 this evening. And this is actually last year's release. But if I'm being honest, I think it's my favorite release so far. So I'm excited that we have that one to taste tonight. As I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with Midwinters, it's our most anticipated release of the year. This is the release where people line up down the street in Park City. We've even had people camp the night before at the distillery and the saloon so that they can be first in line to get their Midwinters when it releases. This blend of Midwinter Nights Dram is 4 to 10-year-old rye whiskey. We have MGP High Rye Mash Bill, the 95% rye. And we also have High West Rye, which is 100% rye. It's 80% raw rye and 20% malted rye. So this does contain that High West pot still rye, and that brings some more rich characters, some heavier congeners, a little bit more barrel maturation character to the blend as well. We finished the blend in Ruby and Tawny port barrels. My strategy for sourcing the Ruby and Tawny port barrels is to get Ruby and Tawny port barrels from multiple suppliers in the Douro Valley in Portugal. And with that, we can get different complexities from each supplier and use that as we blend to create this blend. Midwinter Nights Dram is one of those blends that we want to be different every year, and we celebrate each year like a vintage of wine so that we can talk about it. This is what we did differently. We change that ratio of the Ruby to Tawny port barrels yearly, and that's another attribute that can change the sensory here as well. It's usually, always a majority Ruby port, and that brings more of those concentrated red fruit characters. But the Tawny port brings in this really nice undertone of complexity with more of the like nutty caramelized character as well, a little bit more oxidative character. With that, what sensory notes are you getting off of this? Oh, I should also mention this is at 98.6 proof. The story behind that is that our founder, Dave, wanted this to be at body temperature. And to be 100% honest with you, at one point, the master distiller and I went through and we tested different proofs because we thought that might be a silly reason to just have that proof. And as it turns out, 98.6 is the right proof for this blend. So we kept it.
So he wanted to be like Blood Oath, because I think that's what they do. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that brand, or Blood Oath. I think that's what they do as well. And the whole thing behind Blood Oath, blood poured, is 98.6 proof, refers to that. But like, what's up with the scene number? Like, I understand the Act 11, so it's like 11th year. What's up with the scene? What does that mean?
The scene is the day of bottling. So I believe from my notes, you have scene 7. That means this was bottled on day 7 of bottling the Midwinter Night's Dram for Act 11.
It was bottled. Okay.
On the 7th.
I have heard such wild theories on what the scenes correspond to. Most recent one was somebody telling me that it corresponded to pages within Midwinter Night's Dram and full codes on there. And I was like, the blending team does not have that much time.
I love the creativity though.
Yes.
A great story.
Like, don't want to ruin the creativity there, but I can say that is not the case. I love this one. My first Midwinters that I had was Act 4. And when I tried this last year for the first time, it sparked that sensory memory of trying Midwinters for the first time, a little bit more rye forward than the last few releases.
And I think this one too really shows off that concentrated, brighter red fruit character from the ruby port barrels. And that's one of the attributes that I love about this coming through from the finishing barrels.
When we started
very jammy on the nose.
Yeah, jammy.
When we started this, I lined all these up, and this one, I know color really doesn't play anything, but this was my favorite color pick. So I thought it hit the spot.
It's just a fantastic expression. I mean, they all are, but I think this one is definitely one of the better ones.
Absolutely. I mean, this is the third one that I've tasted, and this is the best by far.
Is there any plan to ever release one of these at higher proof?
Right now, we do not have that plan. We did release, if you're familiar with the Encore, it came out with the 10th release. That was a little bit higher, 101.5, I believe it was. It was 101 something, 101.6 maybe. And so that came a little bit higher. But I think, really what we're trying to balance here, and we did look at some higher proofs when we went through that exercise some years back to determine if 98.6 was the right proof. And what we found, with our particular blend and what we were working with is that the ethanol would kind of compete with that finishing character a little bit. And we wanted that to come through in a certain concentration. And so this is where it settled for us where we wanted our blend profile to sit.
So this is last year's release, not this year's, right?
That's correct. Yes. This year we had Act 12.
I just happen to have Act 11, Scene 3. So you're telling me, so it's 4 days away or 4 days earlier. Is it going to be any different?
Should not be different.
Okay.
We batch everything with the exact same blend ratios. And what we do when we dump those port barrels, we are able to dump all of our ruby port barrels together and all of our tawny port barrels together. So when we create the blend, we are pulling from homogeneous, batches of the whiskey.
So I apologize if I kind of didn't understand, but it's the batching is the scene or the bottling?
It's basically both. So each day of bottling, a new batch is blended by our blending team. And so that's the 7th day of bottling. It's the 7th batch that they created on the floor.
So in theory, in a given act, there shouldn't be that much variation.
There should not be. No,
I mean,
and we have not seen any either.
ideally,
for
you're mixing the
clarifying.
same amounts each day.
What's that?
Ideally, you're mixing the same amounts each day.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And we blend by weight and proof. And so, everything is done with scales to make sure that we're hitting our targets exactly. And then we check everything in sensory before it goes into bottling. And so we check it against a control, and we check it against one of the previous days of bottling, except for day one, obviously. But just to make sure that everything is still in line.
That truth is going to mess with a lot of taters' heads. Thank you for that.
You should pick one day and bottle like 20% of what you normally would do and just create a frenzy around that one day. There's a lot of
Seen ones this year.
I'm reading some comments, not to go on a tangent, but people are saying, some people are saying that campfire is actually one of their best, their favorite expressions from High West. And it's interesting too, because campfire should be readily available wherever you live. And we, like, between Seth and I, we wanted to include something in this kit that isn't, right, that you might have challenges getting locally. But I think it's music to Seth's ears to hear that campfire, people are finding campfire to be one of their most favorite expressions from High West. Again, just because it's so widely available and people can pick it up at any time. And I think that has something to do with most of the people having that experience, right, with that expression. Not everybody probably have tasted Midwinter, and definitely not prisoners. So,
right, the campfire is lovely, and I love to see all of the love for campfire here, as that in some places that can be more of a polarizing blend because of that peated Scotch component. I personally love it, and before I interviewed at High West, it was the first High West whiskey that I had tasted. I just went right in, to the most complex blend right up front. But it's a really beautiful blend, and it presents great in cocktails as well.
speaking about favorite expressions from High West, Yippee is by far is my favorite, and it has been for a long time. And then you guys stopped producing it, and now there are rumors that it might be coming back. Can you speak to that?
Sure. It will not be coming back.
Damn it.
I'm so sorry to tell you that, but I'm just going to be forward with you about it. I'll tell you the story behind Yippee Ki Yay. As I mentioned earlier, it was born out of that barrel select program where they had put down some double rye into Syrah barrels and vermouth barrels and decided to make a blend out of it. So when they decided to make that blend out of it, our supplier for the vermouth barrels, which was Quaddy Winery out in California, for their Via vermouth, they had had an inventory correction. And so they were getting rid of a whole bunch of vermouth barrels. Well, so we got them and we were able to create Yippee Ki Yay for a few years from it. But then that inventory correction never happened again, and we were never able to get more vermouth barrels. So then we started trying to explore vermouth barrels from other suppliers, and we just could not hit the flavor profile. It wasn't right. And so for that reason, with our supply chain of those vermouth barrels, we just were not able to create it anymore with that flavor profile.
So you're saying if I find a Via vermouth barrel empty, I can perhaps send it your way and you can make a bespoke blend for the prime barrel?
Oh, hell yeah.
Make it happen, Michael. Make it happen.
I'm going to say good luck. I've been trying to get those for years.
Do it.
I might have it in. But anyway,
Okay.
we can talk.
Michael can
Are
do
there any
it.
plans of doing a sherry finish?
That's it. Ooh, sherry finish.
A PX sherry. So one of my favorite ones that got released in Arizona is the double rye. It's actually a few years old. And it's an Oloroso sherry. So it's good, but I would love to have a little higher proof double rye finished in a PX sherry.
So
Is that a possibility?
in our single barrel program, we do have Amontillado, the Pedro Jimenez, and Oloroso sherry finished blends. And so those are all going to be scattered in that single barrel program. And that single barrel program is returning to base blends of our core products. So double rye, bourbon, rendezvous, and campfire. The majority of them will be double rye and bourbon, with a minority of the rendezvous and campfire.
One where he's asking for the campfire finish in the sherry barrel. Wow.
And
for
those are
this
great.
year, for the cast series for this year, which is a bourbon rye blend, we're doing, as we had Barbados rum last year, this year we have the Petite Syrah, we have the Sauvignon Blanc, and then finishing out the year with an Oloroso sherry. So do have the sherry finish coming out this year, and it is exactly as delicious as you would expect it to be. Not double rye, but still, you got rye in that blend and absolutely delicious.
Right. And yeah, thank you for mentioning that, Seth. That will be the last of the batching program.
Interestingly, so as anything in a whiskey world, right? You have your peaks and valleys in terms of like what people gravitate towards too. And so a couple of years back, there was a huge boom in finished expressions. Everybody and their mother were doing them. Obviously, High West has started way before that. You kind of made your name on it. You've got all kinds of different finished barrels available prior to that boom that I'm talking about. But now that we kind of turned the corner and people are going from my vantage point, which is a retailer slash, club facilitator, people are sort of like not necessarily not necessarily not wanting it, but they're gravitating towards just regular expressions, maybe aged expressions, maybe something double oaked, but not finished, right? And as a producer that has made a name on finished whiskeys, do you guys feel that at all, or am I way off base here?
I'm probably not in the best position to comment on that. I think our marketing team would probably have a better answer for that, but I do know that they keep coming to me asking me to deliver on finished products. But for example, with the bottled and bond, that's another one of our answers that kind of fits that criteria. No finishing. So I think that we're doing a good job of diversifying our portfolio across where the numbers of cases sit for what we offer.
All right. Do we move on to the last one in the kit?
Oh, did we talk about sensory notes on Midwinters? Or maybe there's some in the comments that I missed, but
there are a bunch of comments on the sensory, but guys, if you want to chime in, I think by far this is probably the favorite so far. Again, I'm not taking any offense if Armagnac isn't your top one, but like for me personally, this is the most favorite one, like including our own pick, because they're very different, right? This is like a perfect autumn, fall, winter. Like that's appropriately named. Let's just say that. So
it is awesome.
Yeah, it is awesome. It is awesome.
Tied with Bottle and Bond for me tonight.
Bottle and Bond was awesome too.
Bottle and Bond was. It's surprising at 100 proof that it was that flavorful.
Well, for High West folks, we have a survey normally that we do at the end of each call. And then I display the results of it live in real time to you guys. So where I basically ask people to score every single expression, I should say, that we tasted today on a scale of 0 to 10. So that's coming. I'm going to put a link into a chat, and if you guys take a second to do that, that'd be great. But any comments before we move on to Prisoner?
Well, I can share our team sensory notes here too.
Sure. Go ahead.
On the nose, we have poached pears, dried cherry, star anise, nutmeg, spiced Christmas cookie, dark chocolate mocha, cinnamon ginger cake, and here's one, my favorite for you, is leaves on the forest floor.
Isn't that Great Myth cereal?
I was even going to ask, who's ever had poached pears? Anybody?
Yeah.
Well, I've eaten poached pears. I can't say the same for leaves off the forest floor.
Yeah,
I wonder what they smoke before they try that for sure. But yeah,
that was nosing. So
the leaves are in quotation marks.
On the palate, abounding with fig, cranberry, dark plum jam on rye toast, gingerbread, sipping chocolate, brandied cherries, winter spiced mocha, and French oak spice. And on the finish, Luxardo cherry at the bottom of a Manhattan cocktail. Tons of complexity. when we see sensory notes where we have so much variety, this much variety coming through, I mean, this really speaks to the complexity of this beautiful blend.
I think the fig hits that on the nose.
Yeah.
I was getting black cherry and I was getting dates, and I couldn't pick out what the spice was. Almost like I was going in the pecan pie direction, but fig is much better.
Fig
I
and
think
plum.
Luxardo is on the nose too. I think Luxardo hits it. Yeah.
The plum is definitely present for me on it.
Yeah. So kudos to your sensory team.
Thank you. We have a very creative bunch, and I love to get us all together and see what we come up with.
I just always want a candle that matches the nose from Midwinters every year. It's like, just have one of those going all winter long.
It'd be a fun side project.
Yeah.
So the next and final whiskey in our lineup is our Prisoner's Share. And we have the 2023 release here from last year. It's also the last release that we did for Prisoner's Share. And this is a bourbon, a blend of bourbon and rye, aged for 4 to 15 years and finished in red wine barrels, red wine Prisoner barrels from the Prisoner Wine Company for 11 months. Across the spirits in the blend, we have MGP 21% rye bourbon. We have 2 Kentucky bourbons that are lower rye, 10 and 13%. We have MGP rye at 95% rye, and the High West rye, that's the 100% rye. And what I love about getting finishing barrels from within our Constellation portfolio, because the Prisoner Wine Company is part of that wine side of Constellation, is that we have a lot of control over the barrel. And it's so important to make sure that your barrel, especially when you're dealing with wine, does not, get hot or, grow any microbes or bacteria that are going to give it off notes. And so, we have the control to give them the directives on how to preserve those barrels best. And we are filling them essentially within 1 week of them dumping those barrels for bottling. And so, in my mind, these are the highest quality wine barrels that we can get.
I mean, for the people that don't know wine all that much, Prisoner's Share is a pretty famous brand and pretty high sought after wine to start with, and then you put, 4 to 15-year blend in it, and that kind of explains the rarity of the expression and therefore secondary pricing, because it's not really available at any store at this point. It's been when was this released? 2 years ago? 3 years ago?
We released last year's was released in December, and New York State got a little over 600 bottles for the whole state. So very, very limited.
Yep.
Extremely limited. Yeah.
What is the red wine?
Any idea what red wine they used?
Yeah.
So that is their blend of, and their blend changes every year too. So I believe they had Syrah, Charbonneau, some Petite Syrah in there, and maybe a little bit of Petit Verdot as well, if I remember correctly. But when we get it from them, it's already in that red wine blend for whatever goes into their blend for that year.
So those barrels for last year's would have been 2022's red blend.
Okay, so it's a blend. I get the Syrah. I can actually taste it.
And the Syrah is an impactful grape. But yes, the harvest would have been from 2022.
How long is the finish? Did you already say that?
11 months.
11 months, okay.
I'll say this, and I don't mean to be controversial, but what's the MSRP? I should know this, but what's the MSRP on this?
I believe it's 175.
175. So even so for me, and again, I'm coming off of 5 different expressions, and this is the 6th one. This is by far the most expensive one if you were to buy it, even at MSRP. For me personally, it's not worth it. Why? It's a lovely whiskey, don't get me wrong, but I still like the wine finish personally for me is hit or miss for the most part, and miss for the most part. Like it's so difficult to execute a nice wine finish without overpowering the bourbon. Like if I wanted to drink wine, I'll drink wine, and then like Prisoner Chef has lovely wine, but not something like this. Like especially coming off Midwinter. Sorry, my kid is going crazy. Um, Coming off of Midwinter, this is a bit tannic. And I feel that way about most wine finishes. They tend to be too tannic for at least for my palate. And again, that this is super subjective, obviously. So I'll just say that, and definitely not worth it at the secondary price. So I'll just say that.
Tara, I have a question for you. Between the first release and second release, because to my palate, first release was not as influenced by the wine as the second release. Second release for me, I get a bit more of the kind of jammy red fruit notes, while the first release, the rye and the blend comes a little more forward, and the wine is a little bit more in the kind of background notes with it.
And I think that speaks to the blends are a little bit different between each year as opposed to the when considering the ratio of bourbon to rye. And so I think that some of that base whiskey and how the finishing shows through on your base whiskey can be different from year to year. The finishing time was similar, and I think it just has to do with the complexities of your base blend and having and how it reacts with the finishing, which is different every year too. So it is, there are some complex processes that I don't always have the explanation for, but when we pull it out of barrel, we work with it to make the best blend. And we did want both releases to come across differently and celebrate it like a vintage.
Yeah, and those kind of purposeful flavor drifts, which make tasting them side by side so much fun.
Precisely.
Well, lucky for you guys, I'm in the minority because people are definitely digging this.
No,
and again, not to say that I'm not. It's just like I guess it didn't come off the right way.
Michael,
like
I'm with you though, right?
Yeah.
When I drink wine, it's very dry, it's very tannic. I don't gravitate towards it at all. I do drink port and I drink sherry. And then I love those because they're of the viscous quality, right? And I can get it. I was gonna say maybe I can't remember what blend, but like a Tuscan, right? Might be my favorite if I had to drink a red wine. But it's still very dry when you come in from the bourbon world. So it has a unique audience. I can see why it sells, especially if you're turning somebody who drinks wine over to the bourbon side. I can see that. But I'm with you, Mike.
There is nothing wrong with it. Absolutely. So let me rephrase what I've said. Like I'm not backpedaling, but there's nothing wrong with the whiskey. Like there's definitely a niche for this type of expression. And if you like wine, more likely than not, you'll enjoy this very much so because the whiskey is fantastic. It's just for my personal taste, I'll pick Midwinter 10 times out of 10 over this one.
Well, and to Tara's point earlier, everybody's got different palates going on. For me, it's 100%. The acidic quality of it, and I have the same issue with like BDN or any sort of citrus type finish. It just doesn't work for me personally.
Totally agree.
With all the wine finishes that we've done, historically, and especially with the cask series from last year to this year, I think I've been most pleasantly surprised by the white wine finishes, starting with Encore with that white port finish. Just I bribed a family friend into waiting 4 hours for me to get some bottles of that. Benefits of having grown up in Utah, and then the Chardonnay finish we did last year, I had no idea what to expect, and it was such a pleasant surprise. The Sauvignon Blanc that we are doing this year was another just delightful surprise, and I feel like almost completely different from how the Chardonnay expressed.
Right.
Whites tend to be lighter and sweeter, so that makes perfect sense.
And
Do you guys have an American single malt in your portfolio?
we do.
Yeah, we do.
It's 100% High West single malt, and right
So
now
not sourced, it's yours.
100% ours. Yep.
Wow. Okay.
And for now, that SKU has been pulled back to distillery only for the next couple of years. But as we see how things roll out with the TTB definition of American single malt, and maybe some more interest in the market, we'll bring that back to national release.
Any chance of releasing to a specific club? like the
Probably
one
not the
here?
right person to answer that question.
All right.
Always.
We do have plenty of the high country available here in New York State. The most recent release has been my favorite out of having tasted back to and still having a bottle of the first year's release. It's been fun watching that bottle grow up, so to speak, and very, very delicious. So if you haven't had the chance to try it, I could. Obviously bias here, but can't recommend that more highly.
Yeah, I think we have a listing on the Wine Spot's website for it. I wasn't sure, Seth, if it was still available or not, but I'm glad that it is, right? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So for the people that are wanting it, yeah, Chris and I think Scott, you can go into Wine Spot and buy it.
Okay.
For the full barrel, Chris, I'm not sure if it has grown up to the point where we can actually get the full barrel of American single malt, and that goes and that's a shame because I actually love the category. I think there's fantastic whiskeys made in that category, but that moniker is something that people can't get behind for whatever reason. I don't know why, and
it's a palate thing. I have friends in my other club that just don't like it. I'll bring it out, on a come drink my whiskey night, and it's not the most popular, right? There's only a couple of us that I love it. I love the category.
I mean, we've done tastings similar to this one with Westward and definitely Westward. I can't recall if there was another one, but definitely Westward, and everything in that portfolio was fantastic. We just couldn't get enough, interest in pulling the trigger on a single barrel. I'll say this too. American single malts tend to be on the higher end of things in terms of the price. So that also doesn't help its cause versus when you compare it to bourbon or rye. And I think that's because the components that go into producing that whiskey, I think, cost more, right? And so that's a direct correlation. So,
but imagine American single malt finished in port the way they do Dram.
Yeah.
It would be good.
We do finish a portion of ours in port and sherry barrels.
Oh dear God! And that's available.
It is available. I just checked our inventory levels for New York State, and we have it still in stock here. So
you are speaking Chris's language.
Maybe being pulled back to the distillery. We'll have it here in New York State for a little while at least.
Okay, I'm listening.
Seth, I wanted to thank you for bringing up those white wine finishes, the Chardonnay and the Sauvignon Blanc, because the white wine finishes are some of my favorite, actually. And, they don't get enough attention in the market, from buyers, I think, at times, because people maybe are looking for other types of finishes, sherries, red wines. But you get some very beautiful complexities off of those white wine finishes and beautiful nuances that are so unique and so special. And I really love to do those. And so you will continue to see those coming out of High West in the future. So when you have an opportunity, I hope you'll have the opportunity to taste some.
Yeah, no,
So,
those have been one of my favorites. And then Prime Bear. Michael, when did you guys do the Pinot de Charente finish? Was that 2021?
Ooh. 2021. Yes, correct.
That
I still have a bottle
may
of that.
be one of my favorite barrel selects that I've had, period. Just the nose on that, so incredibly aromatic and I mean, just the array of, wine, fortified wine that we've used, like they always surprise you.
We did two. That was one, and I think that was bourbon. We also did the rye finish in aquavit, which is also kind of weird finish, but it just worked great.
It worked.
Yeah,
That one was also really uniquely interesting.
Yeah.
I've always enjoyed if I find an unusual finish, I always pick one up.
Seb, do you know the batch number for the malt, the single malt?
Let's see.
Does it go by batch? Does it go by year? Like, is it an annual release, or like how does this work? I'm not really sure.
It's been early. Generally, we had gotten it in January. I have the 2022 release behind me right now, which would be 2022J12.
22J12?
But I don't have a bottle of the 2023 release, at least in my office up here right now.
All right, we'll take it offline. I'm just looking at our inventory, and it just shows sold out, which is probably why it's not showing on the website. But just shoot me the batch number. I'll make it available to people for those
absolutely.
Yeah. By the way, the link to the survey is in the chat. If you guys didn't take a minute to fill it out, please do. Let me see. I'm gonna copy and paste it again, so you don't have to look for it.
It's like, I don't see it. Can you post it again?
Yeah, there you go.
Tara, some questions for you while we've got just a few more minutes here. I asked this question to Isaac when we had a team meeting where we were able to ask a lot of questions. If you could make anything under the High West name without concern of how it would sell, what would you want to do?
Oh, wow. That is a great question. Well, actually, I think we've just done it, and it will be our next release under the icon, coming after the prisoner share. It's called the Noble Share, and I can't give too many details, but it is a rye whiskey that we've got a little bit of tequila character in there, a little bit of Amberana character in there. We're really excited about it. And so
I'm so excited for this one.
And we just finished the blend yesterday, and I was so excited. I just couldn't stop smiling. So that's maybe that answers the question.
Tequila and Amberana, I got to say, I'm a little scared.
Don't be. This is amazing.
Oh, I'm so excited for this. Well, when we were still kind of making the decision on what we were going to go with, Caitlin asked me my opinion on like possibilities, and my response was, I've only had a handful of tequila finishes. Every single one that I've had has been uniquely interesting and delicious, and it's like, please do the like fingers crossed for the tequila finish here.
Yeah, I am of all the releases, I am most excited about this in my almost 9 years with High West. So this one's exciting.
And especially with those bespoke barrels, it's just I know it's going to be a special one.
Absolutely. Would you like me to go over our team's tasting notes for the prisoner share?
Oh yeah, kind of curious.
First of all, I forgot to mention prisoner share is at 102 proof. On the nose, we have dried raspberry, macerated cherries, twine-tied cinnamon sticks. Don't forget the twine-tied part of the cinnamon sticks. Clove-spiced orange, coffee-rubbed brisket, burnt ends, cozy potpourri in a fall storm, hint of white pepper and warm barrel sugar. On the palate, ripe cherries, dark shortbread with strawberry jam, sticky chocolate brownie crust, allspice, cinnamon, juniper, mahogany keepsake chest. And on the finish, gingerbread with orange spice tea.
I say you put that potpourri in the spice chest and kick it out, but everything else was pretty accurate.
Okay.
That's like mahogany.
There's like
That's crazy.
a big old like plate of gummies right in the middle of the table. Because the twine, come on.
You know, that was somebody who ate a sandwich and forgot to peel the paper off the cheese. And they got to eat the sandwich, and they're like, "I'm getting something. It's earthy and paper-esque, and I can't quite pick it up." And that's what they
It
got.
tastes like twine.
Yeah.
All right, moment of truth. Okay, so again, for Seth and for Tina, this is the way this works is it's a series of 6 questions, one for each expression, where I ask people to rate it on a scale of 0 to 10. And again, for the background, for yours, because everybody else knows this by now, when we go in these barrel picks, we use essentially pretty much the same scale, and if the score is average score is 7 or above, that becomes a barrel pick for the most part. I don't think we ever had a barrel that scored 10 across the board. We had some 9s and 8s, and definitely a bunch of 7s, right? So let's start with the first one, which was our pick, and so this gotten a 7.6 average score, which is great. Right, just based on what I just said, nobody didn't like it. Somebody just found it, meh, and then most people did like it. And getting a little bit ahead of myself, this is the second highest score from today. Moving on to the Barbados rum finish one, that's 7.4. Again, very respectable score. You have a couple of people that didn't care for it, but most people did. Compare that to Nelson. The High West scored higher, 7.4, 7.1, not a lot higher, but I think the differentiator was somebody scored 10 for the Barbados rum finish. Somebody really loved that one, versus Nelson rum, where people didn't give it a 10, but that's really the only difference. Moving on to the rye, kind of like a bell curve, but skewed towards the right end of it, right? Where people did like it more that didn't like it. 7.2, again, very respectable. If you look at the distribution, more people loved it than didn't. And that's great. I think for me personally, this was probably my third favorite from today. Midwinter, no surprise there. That's 8.8, almost 9. That's a unanimous number one. I mean, nobody didn't like it. And so I'm kind of surprised it's gotten some 6s and 7s, but for the most part, for the most of us, this was the clear winner. And then the prisoner share, 7.5. Again, no 4s, nothing below 5, which is great. I can tell you this much: this club isn't necessarily keen on doing any wine finishes. I don't think we've done red wine finishes to speak of in terms of barrel selections. So that's very encouraging to see that people are actually digging the right finish when it's done properly and when it's done, artfully. So if you're keeping score, again, Midwinter was your number one from today, followed by the prime barrel pick. And the third highest one was, I believe, the prisoners, right? Yeah, the prisoners was number 3. So that's your scores. Is that kind of aligned with everybody's, or did you guys have a different score as you were scoring them?
That sounds about right.
All right. Any comments, any questions? I mean, we through the tasting. I wanted to thank both Seth and Tina for your time here today. Appreciate the knowledge. Hopefully, and again, like I'm talking to Seth offline about a couple of things. Hopefully, some of them will come to fruition, and we'll share those when the time is right. Thank you for joining us today. Appreciate your patience. We'll see you guys soon on the next one.